guys, it's Live Science. I'm your host, Judy Stroh. With me this week, I have my coworkers, Yasmin and Nicoletta. Hey guys, how you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Hi, good, how are you?
Welcome to the show, Yas. This is your first week of our second week. We've been doing this so many times. Really exciting, really exciting. So I wanted to just quickly start off talking about why we are doing this. So the purpose of Mental Health Awareness Month is to educate the public about mental illnesses in general, such as almost 20% of Americans who suffer from depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. 2, the realities of living with these conditions, and 3, strategies for mental health and wellness. It also aims to draw attention to suicide, which can be caused by some mental illnesses. Additionally, Mental Health Awareness Month strives to reduce the negative attitudes and misconceptions that surround mental illness. Mental Health Week was launched in 1949, just 3 years after the National Mental Health Act became law, creating the National Institute of Mental Health. America's very first Mental Health Week focused on the symptoms and impacts of depression and anxiety. Eventually, Mental Health Week became Mental Health Month. There are other months and weeks throughout the year that are designated to raise awareness around specific mental health conditions or mental health of different demographic groups. In July, there's Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. In October, there's Mental Illness Awareness Week. And on October 7th, it's National Depression Screening Day. So you can see at MHA, you can take a screening and check out your own mental health. It's free, anonymous, confidential, but these are not a professional diagnosis. It's just a way to check with yourself to take a mental health screening. It's a way for anyone to assess their mental health and recognize signs of mental health problems. Because, if you don't have mental health, you don't really have much health. So, speaking of the depression screening, I wanted to talk to Yasmin because you just did a story about, did you guys mute yourselves? Thank you. I just wanted to talk about the study that you covered about depression.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk first maybe a little bit about depression, and then I'll get into that study that I covered on it. So depression is a very common mental disorder that affects more than 264 million people worldwide, and it's the global leading cause of disability, and those statistics are from the World Health Organization. The National Institute of Mental Health defines depression as a common but serious mood disorder. It causes severe symptoms that affect how you feel, think, handle daily activities that include sleeping, eating, and working. And according to the NIMH, depression, even the most severe cases, can be treated. It's usually treated with medication, psychotherapy, or some kind of combination of the two. But there are also some other options, including brain stimulation therapies. And I'll read you this quick tip that the NIMH has on its website. Quote, no two people are affected the same way by depression, and there's no one-size-fits-all for treatment. It may take some trial and error to find the treatment that works best for you. Between 76% and 85% of people in low and middle income countries don't receive any treatment for mental disorders, including depression, because of barriers to effective care, such as lack of resources, lack of trained healthcare providers, social stigma, or inaccurate assessment, according to the World Health Organization. They also mentioned that the burden of depression and other mental health conditions are on the rise globally. And scientists are increasingly finding that depression is actually linked to a bunch of other health conditions, which transitions me nicely into the article that I wrote on a recent study, which found that major depressive disorder might actually be linked to cellular aging. Major depressive disorder has previously been found to be a risk factor for many different kinds of aging-related diseases, including, heart disease, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, and it's also been linked to early mortality. And this new study focused on what are called epigenetic clocks, which measure specific chemical changes in a person's DNA in order to figure out their cellular age. As a person ages, particular atoms in their DNA start to be replaced by what are called methyl groups, which is basically one carbon atom bound to 3 hydrogen atoms, and it's a natural process known as methylation. Methylation can alter how our genes function in cells, and by tracking these chemical changes, scientists can better understand how a condition such as depression can be tied to accelerating cell aging. So in this study, they specifically looked for a pattern of methylation called grim age, which has been previously linked to mortality. So it's basically specific parts of the DNA that have gathered these methyl groups. And to do this, they took blood samples from 49 people with major depressive disorder who weren't treated with medication and from 60 healthy controls. And they found that even though those people with major depression did not have any physical signs of accelerated aging, they had accelerated cellular aging by an average of 2 years compared to healthy controls. And I can read you this quote I have in the article from lead author Ekaterina Protsenko, who is a medical student at UCSF. And she said this in a statement, quote, "This is shifting the way we understand depression from a purely mental or psychiatric disease limited to processes in the brain to a whole body disease. This should fundamentally alter the way we approach depression and how we think about it as a part of overall health." And there are still many unknowns about the links between depression and other health conditions in the body. It's not yet clear if depression causes changes in methylation in some people, or if depression and methylation are both related to some other underlying factor in the body. And also, as is with a lot of studies, authors note that their sample size was modest and that the findings need to be replicated in a larger and more diverse sample. And the last thing I'll say on this is the researchers are now hoping to determine whether treatments or therapy can actually prevent these methylation changes that seem to accelerate cellular aging. And that's just, one example of the way that depression may be impacting the body on top of the mental burden that it causes.
So again, it's not, when you say cellular aging, it's not the physical appearance. It's just how could that show up, do you think, in a person?
So that's not something that you're going to be able to see physically. Like they said, they didn't see any changes in the physical appearance or anything of these people related to accelerated aging. It's just that their cells started gathering these methyl groups in specific parts that that kind of indicated that their cells had aged more than their chronological age.
Yeah. No, when I read that study, I was just kind of like, well, why didn't they test people that are on medication? So I love that that's like a goal of theirs, is to realize that medication can actually not only just help your overall mood, but your body in itself. That's really cool. Yeah. Have there been any updates on it? Do you know?
Not that I've seen, but yeah, they are hoping to kind of see whether treatments, which I assume is going to be, those medications or therapy, can prevent those changes. I don't know if they have any plans of seeing whether these changes have actually been less in people who have been taking medication for it or not. But I guess we'll see if any follow-up studies come up. Hopefully documents will cover. Yeah.
Well, now we have to.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was really great. Thank you. If you guys have any questions, we're taking questions. We got two very capable writers here that cover this stuff all the time. And I think we're going to just jump into burnout, because I think during this pandemic, we've even seen more how burnout's affecting us on a minute by minute basis, I'll say. It's not something I guess we talk about too often, because I think it's just assumed, especially in America, that we just work constantly. But now, as we're all working from home, we all used to sit next to each other in an office, and now these are our offices. So, Nicoletta, do you want to talk more about that?
Yes, I will. So as Judy was saying, if you've been following any sort of psychology news or self-help news, anything of that sort, you've seen about a roughly bajillion, technical term, articles regarding burnout this year, especially as people who were able to start working from home have transitioned to working from home, and what that looks like in terms of testing our resilience against burnout, especially when the resources that used to be available at work are no longer available because we're not physically in office spaces. So that's a very office-centric example, but this extends across people in the pandemic. And of course, burnout existed long before the pandemic. So let's get into what we're actually talking about when we mention it. Oftentimes, you might just think of burnout as a general sense of exhaustion, which is certainly characteristic of the feeling, but it's not just exhaustion by itself. It's exhaustion, this total lack of energy, but also feelings of cynicism and negativity towards your job and reduced efficacy or success at work. Now, these are all connected to, you can see this side of the screen. We've listed 6 bullet points, factors that can contribute to the onset of all these burnout-related symptoms. And these being, what is your level of workload? Is it too burdensome, too much for you to handle given your job title, the resources provided to you, but also the number of hours in your workday? So your workload being too high can certainly contribute to the onset of feelings of burnout. There's a question of how much control, how much autonomy you hold over the work that you have. Is the onset of your workload unpredictable, or the pacing of your workload highly unpredictable? That can contribute to chronic stress over time, leading to burnout. Do you receive rewards or recognition for working hard at your job, for garnering success? If you do not get consistent positive feedback or just feedback in general on how you're doing at work, this can also lead you to feel isolated and lacking support. And as an extension of lacking in support, there's a question of how your community is at work. How is your relationship amongst the coworkers? Is there a feeling of hyper-competitiveness between people? Are coworkers working together to build up their work as a unit? But also that extends to the higher level of management as well. So what does that community look like? Is it supportive? Is it helpful in times where there's additional stressors? There's a question of workplace policies and how they are implemented. Are they implemented fairly and consistently across all the workers? Do they make sense in terms of the expectations set for workers? And you also have this idea of finding meaning and value in your work. So you hear about burnout a lot in the medical community, for instance, where at baseline, you're coming in and you're having to deal with patients with a great deal of compassion, put a lot of yourself into your work on a day-to-day basis. And for instance, you pop in with a nurse who's delivering babies every day. So that's a very high value job. You can feel like you're contributing to something very important, very meaningful in people's lives. So that feeling of connection to something of great value can definitely buffer the effects of burnout, but it can't necessarily save you from burnout if your workload and your control over your work and your community is not additionally supportive. So you think about all those factors and how they work together. And in that respect, again, I want to differentiate between the idea of just general exhaustion from working hard and what really constitutes burnout, which can almost border on depression-like symptoms at times. It is considered distinct from depression. Burnout syndrome is now officially recognized in the World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases, the 11th edition. And you can look up that definition online, and they've basically said what I just said here. Now, I will have a short segue here. Typically, burnout is directly connected to the idea of work, which, again, we often picture as your typical 9-to-5 office space or physical labor, construction sites, mining, whatever it might be. But you don't always think about those who are working all day but aren't necessarily paid for their labor. So you can also experience burnout in relationship to, for instance, being the stay-at-home parent who's primarily in charge of caregiving throughout the day, handling domestic chores, all that sort of thing. And that isn't necessarily considered in every definition you see of burnout, but that's just something to consider, that what we define as work can affect what we think of as work-related burnout. Now, a lot of these symptoms that I've mentioned probably sound familiar. You've probably experienced either one or a collection of these at some point, particularly in the pandemic. So a huge question is, what do we do about it? And many of the things I'm about to mention in terms of solutions to burnout, a handful of them are really up to you, the individual, or follow under your purview. But there's a lot of things that I'm going to mention that are really more up to your employer, or if you're self-employed, you working to structure your workday in a more healthy, beneficial way that works for you and mitigates the effects of burnout. So both focusing on that idea of meaningfulness in a job, so redefining your sense of purpose, but that can be limiting in that we don't love or necessarily seek out every single job that we end up in. If you happen to be a barista at this moment, but you're in grad school and you're working towards something else, finding your small sense of purpose within whatever you happen to be doing at the time. Things that come under your boss's purview are perhaps granting you more control over your work schedule, offering more flexibility in not only the scheduling, but being able to set clearer boundaries between work and home. So when you clock out, you are done for the day. You cannot be contacted. Things like this can make a more distinct barrier between what's expected of you during working hours and non-working hours. Within those non-working hours especially, there's the idea of taking time for yourself and things that are unrelated to work, whether you choose to call that self-care or just investing in hobbies, investing in relationships that are unrelated to work, diversifying how you spend your time, and finding meaning in those breaks from the workday, of course, are very important. But you need the energy to do those things, and that comes down to how your boss is scheduling your workday. So it's all kind of linked together. But there's this idea of being able to take regular breaks, being able to delineate what is your responsibility, delegate things that should not be on your plate, and take more control of the workday. And also for those with a myriad of responsibilities beyond work, the idea of flexible or reduced working hours for if you have childcare responsibilities, if you have sudden family emergencies or medical emergencies, the flexibility to take time off to deal with things unrelated to work are helpful when you return to work, because then you can fully focus yourself on the task at hand rather than being pulled in 16 directions.
These are all really important ideas, and I really appreciate that you went over different types of jobs that could have burnout, because I mean, during this time, I think we're all definitely feeling it. And yeah, it's kind of crazy how when part of mental health, it affects all the parts, even our regular, like we're talking about with like cellular structures. So we have a comment from Tony. He's wondering what are the classic symptoms of burnout? I'm assuming burnout, Tony, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure thing. So I'm going to actually pull up my notes here so I can give you more direct definition straight from the horse's mouth. So there's a leading psychologist in the US who has done a lot of work on the idea of burnout syndrome and has actually come up with a questionnaire to help to narrow down whether you have burnout or if it's some other issue. Her name is Dr. Christina Maslach. She is a psychology professor at UC Berkeley, and she developed the burnout inventory. So as I said earlier, your trio of symptoms can include this idea of exhaustion, total lack of energy. So this can be both physical, emotional, mental energy in terms of trying to complete tasks. So that's one, is that feeling of overwhelming exhaustion. Feelings of cynicism or negativity towards a job. So you might feel angry, irritable in respect to your job, Dreading going into work, like a deep sense of dread, is definitely associated with burnout, where you wake up in the morning and you're just like, I do not want to be in that space today. So that's number 2. Number 3 is reduced efficacy or success at your job. So you're becoming less effective at the work because of the burnout. So that one's a little fuzzy, at least for me, because it seems mostly related to those other 2. So when you have all 3 of those and they're fairly moderate to severe, that begins going into the realm of burnout as opposed to just exhaustion from your workday. Some other words that come up a lot when you search definitions of burnout. Again, it's very similar sometimes to depressive symptoms, and some of them are overlapping, as you might have noticed. This feeling of lethargy, hopelessness, emptiness, apathy, things of this nature. Especially in jobs when you're asked to put a lot of your emotional self forward. I mentioned medical care before, but teaching might be another good example where you're asked to bring a lot of compassion to your workday. You might be feeling less capable of offering that emotional effort because of how drained you are from the working conditions surrounding you. So that's what I think about when I think of the symptoms.
Thank you, Nicoletta. That really helps. I feel like a lot of the issues is people realize they're burnt out and they just don't really know where to go from there. I know a lot of employers are trying to be, more progressive and address these things, at least with peer good. So I feel like people really need to be more like approaching their bosses and not being afraid to feel ramifications, because you're already feeling the ramifications, right?
Yeah. As I said earlier, there's been some psychologists that have suggested lumping together depression with burnout to say burnout is almost a form of depression. Dr. Christina Maslach, who I mentioned before, has actually argued against this idea, saying although they have overlapping symptoms and people with depression can also have burnout, if you focus on it as if it were a mood disorder like depression, it makes it seem like less the responsibility of the employer to help to mitigate it. That makes sense, was her argument. I'm quoting from an Atlantic article. I believe Judy has the headline up here, but you can see an interview with Dr. Maslach in this article, which I would recommend reading if you want to learn a bit more. There's a lot out on burnout at the moment, but this is a really good piece. But yes, thinking about burnout typically stems from a lack of resources or support in the workplace and being asked to do a lot with very little. And that usually comes from the top down rather than the bottom up. That's not ubiquitously true, but it's often true. So when we think about burnout, we have to think about this broader social implication.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just the way everybody's trying to do everything at once, and they're trying to get the most for their money, and especially during the pandemic where people are already scared to lose their jobs. I can definitely see their mental health and their just general well-being going on the back burner. But those things will come to catch up to you very sooner than later. Yeah, waking up with anxiety is no fun, especially if you're working from home, this is your office. So we really appreciate you guys joining us today. Please take care of yourselves, and we will see you guys next week.